together some text. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Well, first, any questions so far? Any questions about the word teshuva? Its appearance. It's a beautiful word.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about when we call someone Baal Teshuva, Baalat Teshuva, and these are people who have become very observant. And
great question. So some of you may know there are people who grow up secular or reform and they become ultra Orthodox. Certainly, it's probably, it's less so than it was in the past. Used to be a lot more people, less so today. But people would go to Israel and they would become very religious, very observant. And the name given to people who embraced that identity was a Baal Teshuva. And the word here, it's return to your, essentially, your Judaism. Now, it's not our Judaism. It's not how we understand Reform Judaism. But in the Orthodox context, it was return to who you are. You are a Jew who is responsible for performing the mitzvot. Or if you're female, you are responsible for, marrying somebody Jewish and keeping a Jewish home and yada, all that stuff. What Orthodox believe are obligations for women. So the word Baal means a master, somebody who takes possession of something. So literally a Baal Teshuva is one who returns, claims their birthright in a sense, their birthright to be observant. So yeah, that's it. This is another way that word teshuva is, all of us craft our own meaning onto words. So just like the word Torah, the word, how the word Zen, you've got Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance, Winnie the Pooh and Zen, Zen, the Zen of playing tennis, the Zen of anything, you can take that word Zen and it's kind of like a mindset. You can do the same thing with the word teshuva, the teshuva of observance, the teshuva of study. It's kind of a mindset of return, of going back to what makes us great, or however we understand the purpose of our lives. And so for an Orthodox Jew, the purpose of life is to follow the mitzvot. So if somebody returns, somebody embraces following the mitzvot, they've made teshuva. Okay. Other questions about teshuva? Okay. Let me share my screen here. I'll show you these texts. These are, oh, no, that's not it. Let's see. Anyway, let's see. Oh, we don't want this. Let me stop share. Let me find where. Oh, no. Can you see it now? No? You can see the text?
yes,
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. Okay.
I don't know if it's centered, but we
Yeah.
can see it.
Okay. So
I
one of
can't
the
see the left side. The left side is.
Oh. Is that better or worse?
No.
Worse?
No, the same.
Okay.
It didn't change.
Yeah, you have to move it over to the right.
I'm moving it.
Whoops.
No.
No. I don't know why it's doing that. Can you see anything?
Now it's like just a slice of it.
Because it's a PDF. This is part of the problem.
Oh,
It's not a
If
website.
you
It's a
keep going to the direction you were just going, more and more is being revealed.
Oh, there.
no,
I'll just read it. I'll read it out.
I think that's a good idea.
Go back to the way it was originally was better.
Right.
There. That's how it was
Better,
originally.
better.
Yeah,
Better.
that's better.
Okay, good. Okay. So one of the things the rabbis do with teshuva is they play around with what it means. There's a sense that when we make teshuva, it is like not only are we making amends for the past, we are transforming the past. We are literally rewriting history when we make teshuva. The dimension of time, it's kind of like, in Catholicism, if you get an annulment, it's as if the wedding never occurred. In some ways, that's the same thing that happens with teshuva. It's as if the sin never happened. It's not just that you're forgiven for the sin, it's essentially erased. And it is transformed into something positive. And it's, in some sense, it's magical. I want number 3 right here. This is a very famous passage from the Talmud that is relatively complex, but I'm going to try to explain it to you. 7 items were created before the universe: Torah, Teshuva, Gan Eden, Gehinom, the divine throne, the Beit Hamikdash, and the name of the Mashiach. Now, this is an esoteric text. It's a very mystical kind of text. And the idea is the world, God creates the world and puts the world in motion. But there are certain things God plants in the world that are otherworldly, that don't make sense, that are not natural. And it's kind of like, a fragment of a different world is left in our world. And according to the Jewish sages, those things, there are 7 of them. One is, of course, the Torah. The Torah is from God, but it's in our world. Then there's the Garden of Eden, Gehinom, which is hell, essentially, or the precursor to hell. The divine throne, I'm not quite sure what that means in this context. It's more like the sovereignty of God. The Beit Hamikdash was the temple, the name of the Mashiach, which is sort of hidden. But the other thing I'm interested in here is Teshuva. Teshuva is like this magical power to rewrite the past, So if you hurt somebody and you truly made amends and you did all the things that you were supposed to do, remorse, recompense, all the different parts of Teshuva, which is a whole nother topic in itself, but you literally then reshape that relationship. And that's sort of it's kind of magical. It really shouldn't be that way, because in some sense, once you say something, you can't unsay it, right? That you can apologize, but you can't unsay something you've already sent. And if you send an email, you can't unsend an email. You can't, it's already landed in that person's box. You can't take a thought out of their head. And yet with Teshuva, you can essentially, on a spiritual plane, you can erase it. So that's kind of that's pretty a pretty powerful idea. Here on number 2, this kind of explains that idea a little more. Resh Lakish, who was a great rabbi of the Talmudic period, said, Teshuva is great because intentional sin becomes like accidental sin. But didn't Resh Lakish say Teshuva is great for intentional sin becomes like merit? So he's saying essentially both. One is Teshuva from love, the other is Teshuva from fear. Okay, this text is very complicated. It's one line, but it's quite complex here. So Resh Lakish is saying that when you make Teshuva, when you make amends, you forgive, you do all the things that are part of Teshuva, something that was something you intend that counts against you. Let's say you cheated on a test. Let's say you cheated and you got into Harvard. Let's say not the Stanford of the East. That you got it, and and you really did make teshuva for that. Now, if you were to make teshuva for that, that would mean you would leave Harvard. The way you make amends is you would drop out. You would find a way to find the person whose spot you took. You know, all these things. You really seriously made amends for what you did. Then what you did becomes, it no longer counts against you. It either becomes one, an accidental sin. So a mistake, we all make mistakes. Those don't really count against us. Or if we truly make teshuva out of love and we really care, then it actually becomes something positive. That the act itself, the fact that we cheated to get into Harvard, changed our life so much that we made this teshuva, we made all these amends, and that literally became something that led us to the kind of life we want to live. Kind of like, let's say, there's a lot of people, not a lot, but there are people who, let's say they go to jail because they do some awful crime. And then in jail, they become extremely giving and they let's say they become religious. Either they become, Orthodox Jewish or evangelical Christian, and then they do really good work when they come out of jail. There are people like that. There are people who have experienced, who go through something awful, and then they then they become a much better person after experiencing punishment. In a sense, this sin has become something that is a source of merit. Now, you might still say they did something awful. Agreed. No, it's not as, you can't erase an event from happening, but you can alter the meaning of something through teshuva. This is what Resh Lakish is getting at. You literally alter the meaning of something. And there are different motivations. We all have different motivations for making amends. If we make amends because we are afraid of somebody, okay, that's better than nothing. But the true way is to make teshuva from love because we really care. It's it's complicated. It's very complicated. Questions about this? What do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
It reminds me of the author of the song Amazing Grace, who was a slaver.
Yeah.
He was transporting slaves and selling them in America, and had this epiphany and wrote that very moving song. He credited it with that this change in him came by the grace of God. So I'd like to discuss with you, when we do teshuva, is it our own soul searching and effort that does the return, or is it partly through the grace of God?
A beautiful question. So where does teshuva come from? Does it come from us or does it come from God? Well, I think in Judaism, we would say both. That it's not solely on us, but it's also not just God. In some sense, there's a great midrash about, it's sort of related, it's actually quite related to the midrash. I mean, where do you think, the idea of the prodigal son and returning, that all comes out of Judaism. I mean, it's a very famous Christian fable, Christian parable, but it's out of Judaism because there's a midrash, there's a story about a king whose son leaves and becomes a degenerate, a drunk, and all this. And the son really wants to make teshuva. He wants to return, but he doesn't know where to start. And then, somehow the king sends him a message and says, just take the first few steps and I'll meet you there. The king can't totally deliver him. He has to take some action. And the king, of course, is God. But God has that grace when we take the first couple of steps. That's I think the Jewish idea. Now, this fourth text, this is essentially saying the whole point of life is teshuva. the path of all existence is founded upon Teshuva. Entities come into existence as a descent from the divine realm to worldly realms, to a form of descent and of terrible death, to which no descent in this universe, from level to level, from great talent acquisition to lesser talent acquisition, can compare. This is engineered on the higher calculation of justice, which gauge the justice of existence for anything that's created. But this descent has the foundation for greater ascent stored within it. As it is written, before mountains were birds and earth and foundation were formed, you have been God for all eternity. You laid man low and declared, return, son of men. Okay, so it's a lot of rhetoric here. But essentially what this is saying is God creates human beings. We come out of heaven. We come out of this perfect world, out of a kind of Garden of Eden world, into earth, into life. And that's a kind of descent. We're going from perfection to the world, to chaos. I mean, all of us know life is difficult. Bodies decay. Things are broke. You know, life has a lot of problems. But the challenge of that is to rise up, is to live as much of a spiritual life as we can, to live as much of a righteous life as we can. And that is a kind of ascent. It's a return to heaven. We never completely get there, but the whole purpose of existence is moving closer to that. Isn't that a beautiful idea? It's not, it's quite different a little bit from Christianity. In Christianity, there is original sin. So in some ways, this is similar to and different from Christianity. It's similar to in that in Christianity, this world is a descent. This world is imperfect. We are tainted by a kind of original sin. And in this idea, life is tainted, it's difficult. But in Christianity, the way to recover from that original sin is faith in Jesus' salvation. And you are cleansed through belief in Jesus, through Jesus' death and resurrection. That's the path out of original sin. Here, the path out of our, maybe it's not original sin, original unhappiness, or natural unhappiness is teshuva, is return to God through our actions. So it's a different approach, different answer to the same problem.
I have a question.
Yes.
If I make a righteous teshuva, but it's not accepted, is it still erased?
Good question. Yes. You have to try a couple times. In Jewish tradition, if you truly are making teshuva and you have done everything you can to make teshuva, you've done as much as you can, and the person doesn't accept it, you're supposed to go back again. If they don't accept it again, you go back one more time, give them a third chance. And if then they don't, then you are forgiven. And it is as if God has sort of served as a proxy for that person who won't forgive. God forgives on their behalf, and you are clear. Yes, that is the, again, I'm probably oversimplifying it a little bit because there are certain things that is almost impossible to make amends for. You know, there are things that you don't truly forgive, but you move on. You know, that's sort of it's a really tricky idea, you know.
So I have a two-pronged question on that. Saran was just paroled this week. All the Kennedy kids, you know, I think the leader was Robert Kennedy Jr. said, how can you do this? You know, basically saying we don't forgive him. And so that's, you know, one of forgiving, but two of, you know, our penal system and, you know, does this, you know, promote tshuva and do these prisoners, is it possible? And you know, you don't have a crystal ball there, but I think that when applying it to, you know, somebody who's killed your father is, you know, an interesting question.
Very interesting. So this is a, when you forgive somebody, when you make teshuva, it's not as if you are condoning. There's a major difference between, and that's sometimes in Christianity, that this idea of turning the cheek and or loving your enemies, it distorts what the meaning of forgiveness is supposed to be, even in Christianity. You maybe love your enemies because they're human beings in a sense that you love every human being, but you don't love what they did. When you forgive somebody, it's not as if you're saying what they did was okay. You are saying that you are not, you are letting life go on, that it's not the only thing in life that you are focused on. And so I would say in some ways, if we believe that the punishment has been sufficient and that the person has done their time and the punishment fit the crime, then it's totally fine I mean, I don't know how long Sirhan was in, I don't know how he was as a prisoner. All these are important questions. I wouldn't expect the Kennedy family to forgive, but to move on is probably a wise move. And that, in this sense, when we're talking about Teshuva here, we're talking as much about ourselves as other people. This is one of the interesting things about Teshuva. Yes, we have to forgive others and others forgive us, but it's also very inward focused, that we are looking closely at ourselves. Where did we fall off our own path, where we did not live up to what we were capable of? That's this kind of deeper self teshuva that I think is partly what these texts are getting at.
I
Yeah.
really like that distinction.
Yeah.
Sandy Kaminsky, you're gonna need, I think, to unmute.
Yeah, my kids are disturbed about Sirhan getting out. And I think it's more than just the Kennedys. The Kennedys, if they didn't use the word forgive, several of them came out with very, very sympathetic messages. And what he did was not just against the Kennedys, he did that against our whole country. We all suffered from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't forgive him. I don't ever want to forgive. I read something today in the foreword about this Frenchman who was really rallying the troops against the Muslim men who are roaming around in France and in Paris. And he blames, this is going to come up in the French election, because he brought up the immigrants who come, just young men without families. He said that they are there to do destructive things. And there's been so much of that in France, and especially against the Jews.
Yeah.
I don't know how people could forgive that. I can't forgive it. I'm a pretty forgiving person, but I think some of these things where people are taught to hate from the day they're born.
Right. It is a very
it's really awful.
Yeah, it is. It is. And in some ways, I think your point is really good when you talk about how the crime, let's just talk about Sirhan, the crime was not just against,
the Kennedy family.
Yeah, it affected all of us as a nation. And I think that makes something extremely hard to forgive, because essentially in Jewish law, it is the victim who has to forgive. But if the victim is not there, I mean, it's like this comes up a lot around the Holocaust. The people who died, how can they forgive? There's nobody who can you can't really forgive on their behalf. There's a famous rabbinic story kind of about this, where a very famous rabbi is traveling on the train, but he's not dressed like a rabbi at the time. He's, just dressed in everyday clothes. And there's a person on the train who is extremely rude to him and slaps him in the face and just, abuses him essentially. and he doesn't respond. He just sits there, doesn't do anything. And then when he gets off the train, there's a big group there to welcome him, and there's a podium set up for him, and he's famous. He's a highly respected person. He gets up to speak at the podium and so forth. And the person on the train who slapped him in the face is mortified. Oh my God, this is an important person I abused, da 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 da. And he goes up to the rabbi and says, "Can you please forgive me? I didn't know you were this famous rabbi." He says, "I can't forgive you. Only that poor Joe on the train who you slapped around, he's the only one who can forgive you." And so, of course, the point is that only the real victim has the ability to forgive. And in your case, Sandy, you're identifying this real tension in that the victim is much bigger than just one person. And that's true in Jews attacked in France too, or women attacked, it's not just the individual person. So that makes forgiveness even more complicated.
And Rabbi,
Yeah.
even the same or similar to Sirhan is what happened in Israel. I cannot forgive this young man that killed Rabbi, and yet they have allowed him to become engaged, to become married while in prison, to have children. He has fathered children in prison, and he killed the prime minister.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't.
This is and I think this is why Teshuva is such a powerful idea. It truly, most people never make Teshuva. So I don't know too much about this guy Yigal alone, right? The guy who shot. Clearly, he has not made Teshuva. There's no question. He has not. Yeah, from what I've read about him, he has not made Teshuva. I don't know anything about Sirhan. I don't know whether he's made. I don't know whether he's taken. If he hasn't, that's a whole. It is very rare for people to take responsibility. I mean, just look at the world around us. How many people actually truly take responsibility for their actions? So Teshuva is so precious and so important because it is so rare. And that's essentially why we have to put so much effort into it. It is extremely difficult. In some ways, it's against human nature. The natural thing to do is the natural part of humanity is the cycle of violence, cycle of revenge. So Sirhan kills this person, so we go kill someone in Sirhan's family, and then they kill them. I mean, that's how most of life has been. In some sense, Judaism is a revolution against that way, but it's not easy. And it truly takes a kind of leap of the spirit. This is one of the texts here below. Thoughts of Teshuva reveal the depths of one's desire, and the strength of the soul is revealed in all its glory through those thoughts. The greater the thought of Teshuva, the greater its liberation. In some sense, the deeper we are committed to changing, the more powerful that change is. And then Teshuva always resides in the heart. It's stored in the heart even during the sin itself. This is talking about the truly righteous person who has that spark of Teshuva. Comments?
Barbara, and you need to unmute.
Well, that's much deeper than I can even fathom.
It is.
I'm not that righteous.
No. Most of us aren't.
No. Being even on that path is, I think, something that you'd have to give them the benefit of the doubt and forgive them for whatever they do along the path, because they are amazing to feel so blessed, so in that realm. I'm curious though, because Sandy said she can't forgive people that she doesn't really have a relationship with because they were, politically violent. But what about saying, I let bygones be bygones. That's really not giving teshuva. That's really sort of just putting it aside and not letting it be part of your life anymore. But that's not really teshuva. That's really just
No, you're right.
giving it-
It's
giving
moving
up.
on.
It's moving on.
Yeah, and I think that is what most of us do with a lot of things in life, because you have to. I mean, if we got caught up in every terrible thing somebody did to us or someone we love or someone we're connected to, it would never end. So in
Right.
some ways, that's why I like to think of teshuva is as much about going in introspection, going into ourselves, as it is about how we look towards other people. It's truly a introspective act.
So if I felt that I was the victim and I've never been forgiven, do I have to ask her for forgiveness? Do I have to ask the perpetrator of my pain for forgiveness?
It depends on the situation. If you did something, let's say you truly hurt a good friend. Say you would never do that. I know, Barbara, but let's just say that was the case.
Okay. But even if you didn't know you did it, sometimes you can do it.
Well, yeah. I mean, in that case, that's a different sort of classification. That's an unintentional sin, and essentially the requirements of that in Jewish law is much less. But let's just say you did something pretty bad. You have to do everything you can to make amends. Apologize, try to restore. And sometimes that's impossible. Sometimes if you steal from somebody, like Madoff, stole billions of dollars that didn't really exist. So how do you make restitution for that? You can't, it's gone. So, but if you can, you try to make restitution. And if they don't accept it at a certain point, this kind of goes back to what Jill was asking, then you are forgiven. In some sense, it can't just be a one-way street. You do have to offer forgiveness at a certain point. Now, there are exceptions to that. There are exceptions for abuse, for physical abuse. There are exceptions. You don't have to forgive that.
Right.
That's Jewish law is pretty clear on that. But for most things, you need to forgive.
So you as the victim have to forgive, or you as the perpetrator have to ask forgiveness. I know the prayer, but I'm just curious why.
If you're the victim, if the perpetrator asks you and truly does everything that they can, then you're supposed to forgive. And that
is teshuva.
Yeah.
But what if you ask them what if you ask
you're the
them?
Perpetrator?
No, you're the victim.
If you're the victim and you ask, and
you confront them.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. If they don't, then then that's on them. And you just have to, in that case, it's not really, that's not really teshuva. That's sort of a different area of the law. But of course we all deal with that.
We do, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And there is something unfair about forgiveness, but life is unfair. That's just, we all know that life's not fair. And it is not fair in some ways that some people get away with something and other people get caught. But, Harold Kushner talks about this in one of his books where he says, forgiveness is an act sometimes that we do for ourselves so that that person isn't taking up psychic space in our head.
That's
right.
That's exactly the comment that I wanted to say. The inward effect of forgiving someone. There's a difference between forgiving and forgetting. When you forgive someone, you don't forget that happened necessarily. It still happened and you can remember it. But there's two aspects to memory. One is cognitive. I remember this happened, and one is emotional. I
Mhm.
feel sick because this happened. Every time I think about this, I'm upset. There's that emotional component to the memory. And I think by forgiving someone, you can liberate yourself from the emotional component of the memory, and you can try to let it go.
Yeah.
And that
Sarah, I
helps
agree
you.
with that.
Yeah, that helps you move on
Yeah.
emotionally.
So was that letting bygones be bygones, basically?
Yeah, but even deeper than that, I think
Yeah. Well,
but yes, it is. It's I think that's what Kushner was addressing, that you forgive partly um so you don't have your psychic space taken up by that incident.
yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the other thing is in sometimes you have to forgive in making restitution. This allows you to forgive yourself for
Of
something you
course.
did. And you can have shame, you can have guilt. These things can be debilitating to you if you can't let go of those. And I think by giving a mechanism of teshuva that you can work through these things, that way you could let go of some of your shame or guilt for something that you
Yeah.
did.
I mean, here, this text number 7, natural regret, which burns in the heart, is part of teshuva. From the soul's pain at its stagnation rather than descent, or rather than ascent. So essentially, yeah, we have to forgive ourselves. In some ways, a feeling of regret is a signal that we have to look inward. I mean, teshuva is it is a much more than saying sorry. It is truly a self exploration and probing, and that most people, 99% of people, don't do it. I mean, maybe sometimes that's okay. Maybe it's, it can be very difficult to do teshuva, to look at oneself and truly clearly evaluate, and yet it is part of how we grow as human beings. Um, uh, and there is a difference between forgive. I mean, sometimes the word forgive it feels like a very strong word, and sometimes it is as simple as moving on. And one of the great examples in Torah is Jacob and Esau, right? They hate each other for good reason. They both want to kill each other, and then they meet again after 20 years, and they hug and they kiss, and then they just go their separate ways. They're not best friends, even though they're brothers. They go their separate ways. They've essentially forgiven and moved on, but they're not going to spend a lot of time together. And that is a perfectly legitimate way of forgiving. That, let's say you fall out of sorts with your best friend, and you just haven't spoken with one another, and you truly think, okay, or someone who was your best friend, you want to make amends, you want to forgive. You can do that. You don't have to go back to the way it was. That's impossible. But you can make amends and move on. And so that is one type of forgiveness, I think, that Torah offers us, is that Jacob and Esau model. Let's see.
I have a question
Sure.
about another biblical story in that regard. So you have Cain and Abel,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the murder. Um, and God does not kill Cain.
Mm-hmm.
God puts a mark on him, and then he goes on his way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that a sign of forgiveness, or
No, it is a sign of essentially a reminder, the curse of Cain, so to speak. And that's this idea of that Cain cannot erase the past from what happened. It still exists. But Cain has to go on as well. I mean, essentially, I think in some ways it's a story against the cycle of violence, because if God had punished Cain by killing Cain, then humanity would die. There'd be no people to go on. So civilization in some ways depends upon forgiveness, or maybe not forgiveness, but not mutually assured destruction.
Well, also, like, two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah, that's a simpler way to put it. Well said. Yeah. This is an interesting text here. I like this one, number 11. Every sin introduces into the spirit unique anxiety, which departs only via teshuva. The anxiety is converted to faith and courage in proportion to the depth of the teshuva. One can recognize the imprint of that anxiety in the lines of a person's face, his movements, his voice, his conduct, his penmanship, his mode of speech. And this is a 19th century Rabbi, Rav Kook, and especially his writing, his presentation and structuring of ideas. Wherever sin obstructs the light, there the flaw is visible. And according to the level of sin and its relevance to the subject at hand, so is its impression is visible to those who gaze with lucid vision. It's like you meet somebody and you can tell something's wrong. You can tell that they're, that something's off. And what Rav Kook is saying here is, in some ways, that's, revealing something that it's like, with kids are, your kid, I see that with my kids all the time. They do something that they know is wrong. And you ask them and they say, no, I didn't do that. And you could just absolutely tell by the way that they answer and by the way they move their bodies that they did do it. I mean, it's just how they answer, how they say it, the movements on their face. And we're all like that to a degree. Now, maybe as we get older, we get better at hiding it, but it's still revealing in some way. And that the only essentially way is what Rav Kook is saying here is teshuva is the only way that we can truly cleanse ourselves from that there's no way to totally cover up who we are. There has to be some true kind of teshuva if we want to be as good a person as we can be. Any comments? Okay, let's see. All right, let's look at any more text. This is a great text. This is a very famous text, and it's very strange, but it gets at something within Judaism. Number 16, very strict. If a man says, marry me on condition that I'm a tzaddik, that I'm an extremely righteous person, then even if he is fully wicked, she marries him. Perhaps he had thoughts of teshuva in his mind. What? So imagine Osama bin Laden comes and says, marry me. And you say, okay, sure, because maybe he's going to repent someday. You think, well, that woman's got to be a complete idiot. Why would she do that? And probably she is. But the idea is we're not meant to take this text literally. This is not meant to be taken literally. We have to try to say, what are the rabbis trying to get across? What they're trying to get across is teshuva starts with just one spark. That this is a somewhat optimistic view of human nature. That if we just got to start the path of return. We all make mistakes. We all do things that we regret, we wish we had. And instead of papering it over, just the mere thought that we can change, that's the beginning. And that's something God was. So in this text, essentially, God is the woman, the wife, and the tzaddik, or the wicked person who says he wants to be a tzaddik, is us. And we say, God, we want to return. We haven't, but just the mere thought that we might return, God says, absolutely. So there is a kind of open door that whoever we are, this is we have a reading on this on Kol Nidre, that anybody who desires to come into the sanctuary in Kol Nidre is welcome. And this goes back to the Marranos in Spain and people who had converted to Christianity in public and so forth. All were welcome on Yom Kippur, because essentially God welcomes each of us. Just the mere thought of teshuva is the beginning of the path. Any other comments or questions? This is good stuff. Well,
You've given us a lot to think about, Rabbi, and as we prepare, we're in the Yomim Noraim, the days of awe. And, Teshuva is hard. I come from a long line of grudge holders. And, you have to really think about it. And so I think tonight really, is going to get everybody, we have to start thinking about it and so that we can do it.
good. All right, everybody. See you in a couple days. See you on Rosh Hashanah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Happy New
Rabbi.
Year. Shana Tova. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.